Good morning, actually, this time. Normally I'm saying good afternoon, but good morning, Maine. This is Chuck Ellis, and I am your swamp guide, the host here of the Muddy Waters podcast, where we help you, the people of Maine, navigate the muddy waters that are Maine politics, and largely not by me being the expert and telling you everything that I know because I'm so very smart, like a Ben Shapiro, but because I bring on people who are involved in different areas of what's going on here in the state of Maine. And today we have the pleasure of joining us is Representative Jack Ducharme out of Madison, who, amongst other things, sits on the Appropriations Committee in the Maine legislature. How are you doing today, Jack?
Just fine. How about you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing
Good.
well. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'm excited to have you share with people like what's been going on in Augusta. Obviously, for those who are paying attention, we know that there are some issues with the budget shortfall, and then there's some shenanigans going on. My favorite part is in a completely Democrat controlled, in the sense that they control the House by a slim margin, but they control the House, they control the Senate, and they have the governor. And yet, when they can't pass a budget, it's somehow the Republicans' fault. And when they can't, yeah. So anyway, I find that to be very, very interesting in these crazy times. I also, just for fun, there was somebody, and I can't remember who it was, but it was calling out Trump for not doing enough to lower the prices, for the cost of living. Somebody in Maine was saying this. They were trying to call out Trump, and I'm just sitting there thinking to myself, I'm like, here in the state of Maine, we actually, like, first of all, Trump's only been in office for a month, right? And so, like, if you know anything about economics, you know that you can't change things that quickly. Like, just a reality. The decisions that he makes now, we're going to see much more significant impact over the course of the next 6 months, probably, hopefully sooner. But like generally, that's what happens. But the second thing is, like, do you not understand the gaslighting that you're doing? Because Maine Democrats are actually doing things that are causing the cost of living to rise, and they're getting in the way of things that would cause the cost of living to go down. So if you want to call out somebody who actually has the ability to make a difference, if you think the Democrats can do it better, shouldn't you call out the Maine Democrats who are just doing things to raise the cost of living? But that's just kind of an aside. But yeah, so Jack, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about, like, this is your second time on the podcast, but give an opportunity to talk a little bit about what's been going on in the budget process, in general, like what the problem is, and then some of the solutions or lack thereof that are coming out of Augusta.
Sure. Thank you, Chuck. I appreciate you having me on, having this opportunity to kind of give you some sense of order in what's going on in our chaotic little world down there. Just by way of kind of being a primer on the budget process, I think that's helpful, so that there are so many there's so many terms that get thrown around and fly around, and um, so folks understand. We talk about a budget shortfall. Yes, there's a budget shortfall, but we also talk about budget surpluses. We currently have, in the state of Maine, we have what is called a balanced budget amendment. What a balanced budget amendment does is it requires that the state spend everything that it takes in, and budget accordingly for that. Uh, there are certain rules that control how you do that. Um,
So in other words, real quick, like, if no matter what they take in, whether it's a lot or a little, they've got to spend it one way or the other, which could include, like, if they take in too much, they could just include a tax rebate and send money back to the people of Maine,
Correct.
right?
Correct. I would go back to the spring of 22. My first time on the appropriations committee. Wet behind the ears, didn't know really what I was doing, but had the benefit of having the dean of state budgets with me, in Solon Millet, to guide us. But we had a $1.3 billion surplus, in in revenues coming into the state. After we had paid all of the bills, we had $1.3 billion in surplus. Uh,
That
and
really, I think.
what's that?
The federal COVID money, I think, is probably where that came from.
Well, it was actually a result of COVID money, but it definitely wasn't COVID money because the COVID money had definite strings that you had to
Right.
use it for. So
Yeah.
there was a correlation there, but not a direct correlation.
Right. Yeah.
Anyways, to your point of when you have those surpluses, you either spend them or you give them back to the taxpayer. We were able to secure an agreement to get about just under $900 million of that money in the form of $850 checks to every taxpayer in the state of Maine um, that uh, that made less than $200,000, or if you were married filing jointly, or $100,000 if you're single. Um, so every taxpayer that met that threshold got one of those $850 checks. And when we were going through the process to bring that to the table, one of the things that we were concerned about was that the governor would use it as an election tool and would forestall putting the money out until just before the election, and then everybody would get an $850 check from the governor, signed by the governor, and that would virtually cement her reelection. And so we said, no, you need to get this money out as soon as possible, particularly try to get it out between July and August. As it turned out, the money didn't get out until September or October. The checks went out with the governor's signature on them, and they were billed as pandemic relief money. The problem with doing that is everybody heard pandemic relief money and nobody heard Republicans saying, wait a minute, this is your money. We're just giving you your money back. Now,
Right.
because of the redistributive nature of the political system, it necessarily didn't go back to the people in the same increments that they sent it in.
Right.
But
Right.
the key to that was to get that $900 million out of Augusta so they couldn't spend it. Now, bear in mind, I said there was a $1.3 billion surplus. Well, what happened to the other $400 million?
Yeah.
It got spent. So and spent on whatever the virtually whatever the Democrats wanted
Yeah.
because they could. So that's the budget surplus piece. That's why you do a supplemental budget. Fast forward to 2025, we came into session in January with a surplus of about $248 million.
Like
That is
leftover from the previous budget.
Nope, that's revenues that have been realized that we did not anticipate.
Okay.
Because remember, the budget is done on projected revenue.
Right.
So the state economist gets together and the revenue forecasting committee gets together. They project what the revenue is going to be for the state of Maine. And then the governor puts forth a budget to spend that revenue. Well, over and above that projected budget that had the revenue stream coming in to cover it, there's when we came in January, was about $248 million in excess revenue, for which we needed to do a supplemental. The governor put forth a supplemental with a whole lot of different things in it, not the least of which was $118 million to close the Medicare funding gap. Now, the way that in real terms, what that means is in the Medicare, in the Medicaid funding account, the Maine Care funding account. If you think Maine Care and Medicaid, they're the same, kind of like the same funding stream. So in the Maine Care funding account, the Department of Human Services determined that they would run out of money by like April 30th. So in order to sustain their operations and their obligations through the end of the fiscal year, which is June 30th, 2025, they needed $118 million. They actually needed $150 million, but they had $33 million in a stabilization fund that they have assumed that they're just going to use that money as part of the filler of the gap. But they need $118 million roughly. There were a number of other things. And throughout our negotiations, we started looking at some of these things and realized that there wasn't really, it sounds like a whole lot of money, $248 million, but in order to make any kind of substantive changes, you really, there's not really enough money there to do it with. So
Mm.
what we said was, let's just back off and just take care of those things that we must take care of. Okay,
Hmm.
things that are critical in nature. So we came to an agreement, basically came to an agreement that we would agree to close the Maine Care funding gap with $120 million. We would put $2 million aside to do the spruce budworm remediation program. That has to be done in May, so we need to get this done. There were some disaster recovery funds to put money aside so that in the event that we have flooding disasters in the spring, big storms or something like that, we've got some money set aside to be able to meet a federal match for FEMA funds,
Okay.
because FEMA requires, in many cases, they require the state to match a certain amount of money. It's not a dollar for dollar. Sometimes it's $10 for 100. The state puts in
Yeah.
$10.
Assuming they continue to exist.
Right, right. So we decided that we were going to put money aside for that. That was roughly a little over almost $5.5 million. And then some other smaller things. There was $1 million that's due to municipalities for shortages, lost revenues in the property tax stabilization program that got repealed. There were towns that were short money, and so we put $1 million aside for that. Um, and then for their costs to do that program, there was about $46,000. So those two pieces were we agreed that we would fund those. Um, the Department of Corrections had a shortage in their fuel account, of about $750,000, and so we agreed to put the money in there because we had it and they needed it. So we said we'll go ahead and fund that. So we did all of those things. We put all of those things together, and then Republicans said, okay, we need to, in order to get a 2/3 vote, which you need to make this an emergency bill. And just to back up a little bit, if it's a majority bill, if it doesn't have an emergency preamble on it, it has to wait 90 days from the date we adjourn before the
Okay.
money is available. If there's an emergency preamble on it, which there is on the supplemental right now, then the minute we pass it, the minute the governor signs it, the money becomes available. So it is incredibly important to get the emergency preamble on this supplemental budget so that the funding for Maine Care and the spruce budworm piece all can get done when they need to get done. Because remember, the spruce budworm thing needs to be done sometime in May, just based on what the budworm does and the life cycle and so forth. But one of the things that we said was we needed, we wanted to include in the supplemental, in the stripped down supplemental, we didn't spend all the money. There was still $120 million left for the governor. We said we wanted to include the governor's request to reduce general assistance timelines from 12 months to 3 months. Now, for those that don't know, if you apply for general assistance, you can get assistance with your housing for up to 12 months. Um,
Yeah.
and unfortunately, you may have seen the numbers out there, but the general assistance numbers are just absolutely crazy. Um,
Because
I
the
saw
state of Maine for general assistance, my understanding is, like basically towns have to offer it to just about anybody who asks for it
Mhm.
to participate in the state program, which pays 95% of the cost. Is that right? And the town
this
only pays 5%.
no, the state actually pays 70% of the cost.
70%. Okay, they pay 70% of the
70% of the
cost in the
cost.
town.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah,
Um,
and so, do you have the numbers of how much money the state is spending on general assistance? I would love to know that. Somebody probably has it, but
Oh yeah, I actually do. I've got a spreadsheet that tells what we've spent over the last 3 years for every town in the state of Maine. City of Portland over the last 3 years is $78 million.
holy,
Um, I saw a post from our leadership the other day that said since Governor Mills has been in office, the city of Portland has spent $123 million in general assistance money.
wow, wow.
The nearest one to that in the last 3 months is the city of Lewiston. City of Lewiston has spent $3.2 million over the last 3 years. Uh,
Wait, so
so
78 for Portland,
78,
3.2, not 32,
no,
but
3.2.
3.2
Yeah.
for Lewis. Holy,
Now
wow.
the city of Portland has a population of roughly 70,000 people.
Yeah.
City of Lewiston is roughly 39,000 people. The math doesn't work. At 78 million, that's a per capita cost of nearly $1,200 per person in the city of
Yeah.
Portland.
Wow. That's just
Conversely,
yeah.
conversely in Madison, I look at Madison, and Madison spent 45,000 over the last 3 years in general assistance, and the per capita cost on that was somewhere's around uh, $10 a person. So $10 a person versus 1,200 on a
Yeah.
per capita basis.
Well,
So that's
that's a
huge.
program. That's a program that needs reform. We need the Maine Doge to look into that.
Absolutely.
Just
Well, the governor recognizes that it's a problem. Now, our friends on the other side of the aisle don't disagree that there's a problem there, but because they control the levers of power, if you will, um, they don't want to upset that apple cart until they have some sort of, they go through some sort of process. I think that unlike, in some of the federal Doge things, I think that they're cutting with hatchets and machetes when they should be cutting with scalpels. Um, but in this case, I think the general assistance piece we just need to stop the bleeding for right now and figure out how we're going to make this sustainable.
the
Everybody
interesting
everybody
thing is
talks
like,
about sustainability, and this is just not sustainable.
well, yeah, and like Portland, I don't think technically officially they're listed as a sanctuary city, but Cumberland County is a sanctuary county, is my understanding. But like the idea, like not only does the Southern Maine and Portland control so much of the voting block, and have like it's just owned by the Democrats, right? So we get so much of our legislature just they could throw up anybody they wanted. And as long as they get a D next to their name, they're going to win. So they have a lot of influence in Augusta as a result of that, even though they don't really represent the people of Maine as much. But so not only do they have that kind of power, but like the idea that through the General Assistance Fund, their decisions. Part of the problem is how the General Assistance Program is kind of states that basically if
Hmm.
somebody comes to help you basically have to help them in order to
Right.
participate in the state's program. So that's a state problem. They kind of created this, but the reality is that the entire state of Maine is having to pay to foot the bill because of decisions that people are making in Portland. Like that just it's crazy to think how much money they've been able to spend, and basically cause the rest of the state, I mean, they're spending some of their own money too. I mean, I know that taxes are going up like crazy in Portland. It's one of the reasons that when I was buying down here, originally from up there where you are, but I was buying down here. I was like, I'm not buying a place to live myself or a rental property because I play around in that a little bit in Portland. I just won't do it because the taxes and the rent control there too. But like the taxes are going up. But not only are their people paying insane amounts of taxes, but we're getting taxed in order to pay for their misdeeds. Essentially, their
Hmm.
decision to welcome in all these other people is a decision that they're essentially forcing the entire state of Maine to pay for, which
Hmm.
I think is ridiculous. Anyway, and so definitely we need some serious reform of that program. So um, I have a question because I just want to make sure I understand. So,
Hmm.
because I don't understand all the process, I've not been in, in office. I've run twice and failed both times. But um, so you're working on the supplemental budget. You haven't like the Democrats haven't passed a full budget for the biennial budget yet, or have they already done that? Or
No,
we're working on the supplemental first.
no. The way the process works is we go through the supplemental. We try to achieve an agreement on that so that we can pass that. We took a vote on the supplemental, I think, on the 13th, um, whatever the last Tuesday was. We were in session and could not get a 2/3 vote, largely because the other side refused to put in that language that reduced the general assistance from 12 months to 3 months. We offered a
Yeah,
proposal to them to say, well, let's pass it and make it effective July 1st. So that's when the 3 month clock starts. We thought that was reasonable. If we pass it in February, 5 months later, it becomes, 1st of July, it becomes effective. And that's when your 3 month clock starts. So if you add 5 months to 3 months, that's 8 months. Anybody that's in one of these general assistance situations where their housing is getting paid for, they should know now that by the 1st of October, they're going to have to be paying for their own housing someplace. And
just
we thought
very
that was a
reasonable.
that we thought that was a reasonable compromise.
Yeah,
We were very fortunate, and I will be grateful for this. I am grateful for this. In our supplemental negotiations, we did get about, I think there are 6 different main care reforms in there, designed to help us get our arms around the 400,000 people that are on main care in the state of Maine, um, and to understand how we can make those numbers go down, get people out of main care, off from main care, back into the working roles. Um,
yeah,
interestingly enough, the exchange, Obamacare, if you will, I've heard that they're struggling because they don't have enough people paying premiums. Even if their premium is $10 a month or $20 a month, uh, they don't have enough of those people paying premiums because all of those folks are eligible for main care. So we're paying 100% of that
yeah.
when they're eligible. They're eligible for Obamacare, but why would you pay $10 a month when you can get it for free?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's how people's behavior. Why would you go through that process again? Exactly when
Right.
you can get it for free, even if it's just $10 a month, it's
Yeah.
still $10 a month, and so
Part of the
that's still
Yeah.
crazy. That
Yeah.
how many? You said 400,000 people that are on main care. Where we
400,000.
now,
Correct.
do we know what percentage of those people or how many people are? Because my understanding is we're offering a part of the budget shortfall related to main care is because we a lot of the illegal immigrant people are qualifying for and getting main care treatments. Is that right?
I don't have the
The-
the legal or illegal numbers. Those are kind of,
They're not
I
going to
think
share
I think
that
they're
data.
out there, but they're more difficult. What I can tell you is, of that 400,000, 90,000 of those people. Now, I need to say that Republicans, by and large, don't want to throw people that need help off from main care. We don't want to do that. But there are about 90,000 single childless adults in the Maine Care expansion pool, ages 19 to 64, that are on Maine Care. Now, that expansion pool of 90,000 people, they don't have any kids, because if you have kids, then you can get on Maine Care because you have kids, regardless of whatever your situation is. If you have a disability, you can get on Maine Care, and
So they
none
don't
of
have a
those
disability.
don't have a disability. So there are 90,000 single childless adults on Maine
Able-bodied
Care,
people.
which that's kind of our term that we've used, able-bodied people that should be going out and working. Um, and they aren't. Well, part of the reason they're not is because they're on Maine Care. They get, if they're on Maine Care, not only do they get their health care taken care of, they get SNAP benefits, which is the old food stamp program. They get an
Yep.
EBT card for incidentals and so forth and so on. And so when we look at all of those things together, um,
They
there's
probably
just no.
qualify for rental assistance too
Oh,
because
sure,
of their
yeah,
income level, right?
sure.
So
There's
so we
you know
we've
there's
created a financial incentive for them not to get off Maine Care
correct.
and
Correct.
these other
So what
systems.
we did, part of our reform package that we put in, one of the things there were a number of them that were reporting to try and figure out who's doing what and so forth and so on. But probably the most important one that we put in, and the Democrats agreed to, was that within 30 days of passage of the supplemental budget, the commissioner of the Health and Human Services Department would have to put forth a strategic plan to reduce Maine Care rolls by 10% by June 30th, 2026. So a real plan to say, okay, in over the next year, we're going to reduce these rolls by 10%.
Which
Okay.
is very reasonable.
Which is very reasonable. It's not a slash and burn technique, which I don't think you can do. Um, but it would focus in on that single childless adult population to see if there were people there that should be working, that would be contributing to the system, that would be contributing, that could contribute to their own health insurance in the exchange, Obamacare, uh, and like that. So
So
those are the.
I just want to make a comment because like one of the arguments for why we need to like again, let's be clear. So my wife is from Rwanda. I'm
Mhm,
I don't mind legal immigration. I'm very fine with legal immigration.
mhm,
Illegal immigration is something I do have a problem with. But part of the argument that's often used by the people who are saying we need these people is that it's because we don't have enough people to work the jobs that currently exist here in the state of Maine, right? This is the argument that's used. But I'm hearing right now that we have somewhere around 90,000 people that should be in that job. I mean, if they're in the job market, they're really not looking for a career. They're probably working a part-time job so that they can stay under, if they're working any kind of job, but so that they can stay under the income levels to be able to continue to qualify for these benefits, right? So we've got
mhm.
90,000 people. It seems like that's where we don't need to import people, so to speak. We have people, we just need to make them work. That's what it sounds like to me. Am I wrong? Am I missing something, Jack?
No, the income threshold for that cohort of people that is 90,000 is 138% of the federal poverty level. Well,
Which is
the federal poverty level is about $16,000 a year, which isn't a whole lot of money. So
which
138% of that is 22,000.
Yeah, if you
Um,
have a job that pays 40 hours a week, you will make well over that. Yeah.
Correct. And
Yeah.
there's a certain cohort of people 19 to 20 years old that for whatever reason, and I have not yet figured out what differentiates them from the others, that their income threshold is 308% of federal poverty level. it's not a big group. It's a smaller, significantly smaller group, but it's just interesting that in that cohort of people, one could make a young, single male could make $48,000 a year and still be on main care.
Yeah.
I mean,
Wow.
that's pretty huge.
Yeah.
Uh, and so,
Especially
yeah,
depending on where you live
mhm,
in the state, right? Like in a
right,
place like, in rural Maine, that would you do all right. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Making that, especially if you're still you're not having to pay for medical expenses, which is a huge portion of what people spend, their checks on, is paying for their health insurance and then their premiums and all this other kind of stuff. So if you're able to make that much money, I mean, you could do very well in in rural Maine. Yeah.
and remember, part of main care is the SNAP benefits, food stamps, and so forth
Right.
and so
Yep.
on. And kind of I think they call it an EBT card, which gives them incidental money for whatever things they want, I guess. I don't know. I've
Yep.
been fortunate to have never had to participate in the system, so I don't know. Um, but we felt that our reforms that we asked for were reasonable. We thought that we would adopt the governor's language of what she wanted to help out with the general assistance piece, and the Democrats on the other side just could not abide the governor's 3 month limit on general assistance, and so
So let's be clear about this. You're saying that's her. The governor is saying that. The
mhm,
governor is saying we want to limit it to 3 months from 12 months, right?
correct,
So this is not even like being pushed. The Republicans were like, we'll accept anything that gets us in a positive direction.
correct,
Let's get some incremental change, right?
right,
This is actually coming from the Democrat governor,
hmm,
um, and they're still rejecting it.
correct.
And yet, let me just I feel like we need to highlight this. We're being told by the Democrats in the legislature that it's the Republicans who are playing games and won't come to the table. And it sounds to me, the story that you're telling is that, I mean, there are some people who are listening who I think or watching who are probably like, slash it. Let's like 10%. We need to get 20, 30% of people off of main care. I mean, people, I'm not saying I'm necessarily in that category, but I think there are definitely people who are, right. And they're
Hmm.
saying, wait, you're only asking for 10%. Like, the reality is, like, I think that you guys are compromising to a great deal to try and make some incremental change, but are being accused of not willing to come to the table at all. And it's your fault that if main care isn't able to pay its bills and hospitals don't get the money they need, it's all because of the Republicans in the legislature. That's not. It sounds like that's not the case. Even though that's the story we've been told.
Well, and there's all kinds of dynamics going on there, in that the budget negotiations happen, they happen as we're going along, so forth and so on. Um, I can speak to what I know, um, on I can't remember what the date was. The date we voted on it, it was a Tuesday night. The Democrats decided that we were going to vote out the supplemental, and so we negotiated most of the afternoon and evening. Our leadership negotiated with their leadership. We the appropriations committee leads and chairs and House and Senate uh, speaker and majority leader, minority leaders, and so forth all met in the president of the Senate's office, and came down to a couple of different things that we needed to get hammered out. One of the things was our main care reforms that we put in. We left that room with the idea that the administration was going to take a look at the reforms that we had proposed and come back with the appropriate language to get those done. Make sure that we could do them, make sure there wasn't any federal prohibition against being able to do something like we wanted to do. And then the other piece was the Speaker of the House and the Minority Leader of the House, were going to work on the general assistance piece and come up with a revised budget. And we were going to work on the general assistance piece and come up with a revised budget. And we were going to work on the general assistance piece and come up with a revised budget. And we were going to work on the general assistance piece and come up with a revised budget. And we were going to work on the general assistance piece and come up with a revised budget. And we were going to work on the general assistance piece and come up with a revised budget. And we were going to work on the general assistance piece and come up with a revised budget. And we were going to work on the general assistance piece and come up with a revised budget. And we were going to work on the general assistance piece and come up with a revised budget. And we were going to work on the general assistance piece and come up with a revised budget. And we were going to work on the general assistance piece and come up with a revised budget. And we were going to work on the general assistance piece and come up with a revised budget. And we were going to work on the general assistance piece and come up with a revised budget. And we were going to work on the general assistance piece and with some sort of a compromise that they could all live with. At 10 o'clock on that Tuesday night, I texted one of our members who was not there and said, I think we're close to a deal. And they're working with their members right now. At 11 o'clock, the Speaker of the House came into the Republican Appropriations Office and said, I can't get them to go along with the general assistance piece. There's no way they're going to. And so at that point, we had the 6 Maine Care reforms. They had already pretty much agreed to those. So our leader, the minority leader of the House, Billy Bob, he was there. The leader of the leader of the Senate, Trey Stewart, was not there, and he had indicated that we probably shouldn't vote on that before we left. We were still concerned about the language of the Maine Care reforms that we had, and he wanted us to wait until morning to vote on that. The speaker came to our office and said they're not going to go along with the general assistance piece, and they're going to vote this budget out tonight. And we were like, so what are we going to vote for? And he said, well, you've got the Maine Care pieces in there, so if you want to vote for that, you can vote for that, but they're not going to put in the general assistance piece. And so we said, well, what happens if we just leave? Well, if you just leave, they can vote this in because they have 8 members on the House, on the Appropriations Committee, so they can pass anything. They have 8 members. So we made the decision that in order to protect what we had, we would go out and vote in the affirmative for the supplemental with the Maine Care reforms. The next morning, one of our members who wasn't there came in to vote against it because he said, no, without the GA, I'm not voting for it. And then because of a rule change, because none of us had voted against the budget at 1:30 in the morning, because we were trying to get the Maine Care reforms in there. Yep. None of us voted against it. So because there was not an ought not to pass report coming out of committee, they would not allow him to record an ought not to pass report because they had changed a rule that said if there's no existing report, you can't create a new one coming out of committee on an absentee vote. That's all kind of way down in the weeds. That's when everything kind of blew up. So the next day we went in and asked to do a motion for reconsideration. Motion for reconsideration is I don't ever remember it being refused by either party. And they refused to allow us to reconsider our vote. And because they refused to allow us to reconsider our vote, then we had what was called a unanimous report, which meant it didn't go on the regular calendar. It went on the consent calendar, which again is down in the weeds. It's how the legislature works, which means unless we paid attention, they could put that bill right under the hammer and just hammer it through like a unanimous report. And so we were able to block that the next Tuesday in our session. And at the end of the day, because of all of the things that had gone on between the time we voted and the time we went into the House to vote, the time we voted in committee and the time we went into the House to vote, none of us on the Republican side voted for it, just because of some of the things that had gone on. And we tried to amend it by putting in amendments saying we're going to add in the general assistance piece. They wouldn't do that. I offered an amendment to institute work requirements. You got to work 20 hours a week if you're on Maine Care and you're able-bodied. I don't care, if you're disabled and you can't work, that's fine. But if you're able-bodied and you're on Maine Care, you got to at least work or do 20 hours a week of volunteer work or be in school or something like that.
Yeah.
They refused that. Um, there were several other motions that we put in that they just absolutely refused. Um,
So, I think it sounds to me like there's a lot of things that happen here. Some, like I just feel like in politics these days, there's a lot of shenanigans that are happening. Trying to push things through when you don't have agreement, put people in an uncomfortable position, and then blame you, about certain things. And then, I feel like the Republican Party, like what I'm hearing is a lot of compromise, right? A lot of willingness to compromise, but also still having limits on how far to compromise, and then being accused of again being being the problem and the reason that things aren't going through. But like one of the questions I have is like, on this podcast, I would love to interview a Democrat. By the way, I'd love to hear their perspective at
mhm.
some point. Somebody in the legislature, if you know of anybody who might be willing to talk, I'm not going to be a jerk. I'm not going to grill them too hard. I just want to hear where they're coming from and share their story. I'll share my thoughts, but I'm not going to try to go
Mhm.
after them. But I'd love to have a conversation because I want to understand where they're coming from. Like, what was their problem with these reforms? Like, what is their argument for why we need to not make these reforms?
The main care reforms they were willing to do.
Yeah.
The big thing is, well, if I think that the long and the short of it is, on the Appropriations Committee, we currently have a former mayor of the city of Portland, former mayor of the city of Lewiston. We have a former mayor of the city of South Portland. We have Senator Rotundo from Lewiston, who is very well respected. Um, Former mayor of the city of Bangor. Those were the people that were making the decision that we don't want to mess with general assistance. And
So
look at the numbers in their general assistance. They're
right.
protecting the money coming to their cities.
So here's a fun question: like, why in the world? So it sounds like, obviously the idea of a representative republic that we have. Some people call it a democracy, but the constitutional republic is that we elect people to represent us, right? And it would seem to me that the balance of people that are on this appropriations committee, from some of the things that you said and some of the things that you said in the past too, when you were on last time, is not a good mix from around the state, but instead you got a bunch of people who have financial reasons, personal, to protect their town. The state, the cities that spend some of the most money in the state are the ones who are on the appropriations committee, and not really seeking to represent the whole state, but really just their areas. And I understand that, yes, you get elected to represent your city and you have to think about that, but ultimately you're legislating for the entire state, and you need to understand that. And it seems like they don't have that. Um, they don't think that way. But it just, again, it seems interesting to me that you've got like all the anyway. Too many people from the big cities on the appropriations committee is what I would say. Not that we really have cities in Maine, but we'll call them cities. For Maine, they're cities.
Well, and I can't speak to their motivations. I can't speak to the process of
Sure.
how they get put on those committees. I was just fortunate enough to be invited to be on the committee in 2022, and have remained on the committee since then, and then currently serve as the Republican lead. Um, Unfortunately, being the Republican lead on appropriations in the state of Maine, and $3.11, you can get a cup of coffee at Dunkin' Donuts. Um, but those are the kinds of things. But we just try to do what we can to do
Yeah.
the right thing for the people of Maine, whether they live. For me, it's whether they live in Madison, Cornville, or Norridgewock, or whether they live in Waterville, or whether they live in Madawaska, or in Portsmouth. Uh, for me, I view my role as to represent all of the people of Maine, and that's what I try to do on the Appropriations Committee. Try to understand the needs of some of these more metropolitan areas, if you will, while at the same time understanding the ability of the rest of the state of Maine to pay for those priorities.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's interesting. So like the whole, again, this whole process of budgeting, and I hear it from the outside, so I like to hear it from the inside. So you're on the appropriations committee. Most of what we've been talking about was what
Hmm.
was happening in the appropriations committee, but when it was actually voted down was when it went to the floor. Is
Hmm.
that right? And
That's correct.
that's when you guys all decided to vote it down. That's when the
Hmm.
entire legislature voted on it, and because it didn't have because of both the fact that they wouldn't let people, let you change your vote, because it still would have passed committee, because the Democrats control the committee, so it
Hmm.
would have reached the floor no matter what. But at least it would have reached the floor with the Republicans feeling like their voices were appropriately presented. So because they were unwilling to do that, and because they were unwilling to consider like the governor's proposal for a reform on, I can't emphasize that enough. The governor, Janet Mills, who loves spending money, is saying we need to cap this. And because they wouldn't accept that, the Republicans voted against it. A common
Hmm.
sense adjustment to the problem that exists there. So anyway, I feel like that needs to be emphasized. But so thank you for sharing about that. I think that's been really informative, and I hope people have had a good time paying attention and listening to that. I do also want to ask questions about the actual, because there have been some crazy things. We talked about it a little bit before you came on, that
Hmm.
in the general budget, like we talked about the fact that there's about a one thing I want to highlight too is there is a $400 million shortfall approximately in
Hmm.
the projected revenues versus the projected spending that the governor plans. And in her state of the state address, she made sure to, like, there are a number of things that we could probably highlight on, but one of the ones that I focused on in my mind was when she was talking about how we're going to continue to pay for community colleges. And I just am like, I mean, when we're at a position where we have a $400 million budget shortfall, is that an essential? Is that something that we definitely need to pay for? And that's just one example that jumped out to me. It's like, I don't really know that the state needs to pay for that. Anyway, so especially because community college is so much cheaper than regular college anyway, there should be enough people who can find a way to pay for that. But anyway, that's an aside. I think, like, she just is spending and not looking for ways um, to save. And it's worth noting that, and I probably said this on the podcast before, but like before she became governor, like when LePage, I've heard two different numbers, but when LePage's last biennial budget, my understanding is the budget was somewhere between 6.8 billion and 7.1 billion. And the budget that she's proposing is to spend 11.6 billion just 6 years later. So about a 50% increase in spending over what we spent in 2019, in the biennial that ended in 2019. Is that right? Am I numbers close
You're
enough there?
close. The biennial that ended in 2019, that budget was $8.4 billion, all told.
Okay.
Um, 8.4 is the number
Okay.
that budget ended up being.
And that was
Um,
LePage.
and
That was LePage's last biennial.
correct.
Okay. So
And
so
and so now
8.4 to
we're at 11.
11.6. So yeah,
Yeah.
still about a 40%, right around there, 35 to 40% increase in spending. And I don't know
Hmm.
about you, but my income hasn't gone up by that much in that
Nope.
time.
Nope. You're absolutely right. And the interesting thing is I've said a number of times in various media with media folks and so forth, we talk about the fact that Maine has one of the highest tax burdens on its citizens in the nation. I think we're either third or fourth highest tax burden in the nation. But the reality of it is we really don't have a tax problem. We have a spending problem.
Yeah.
And our spending problem comes from a problem with our priorities. That's really where you have to deal with things in the biennial budget. You have to determine what the priorities are of the people of Maine, and then that's what you end up funding. Now, in the biennial budget, there is a continuation of community college. You mentioned that. I've had this conversation with the president of the community college. we'll have some conversations about that. We'll determine if we're doing this, if what we're doing is the right thing to do, number one, and number two, if we're doing it, are we doing it well? And could we do it better? And how can we fix this so that we're basically protecting the dollars of Maine people that are going into this program to truly serve Maine people? The program has been really successful in terms of advancing higher degrees. I don't know if you saw the news yesterday, but University of Maine system as a whole, which is independent of the community college, is showing their third semester of increased enrollments. They're enrolling at a much higher rate. Part of that is because the community college and the University of Maine system got together and said, hey, we've got these folks coming through the community college that are doing a great job. They've taken 60 credit hours. And rather than just let them, just leave the educational piece behind, if there is a particular bachelor's degree pursuit that they want to do, we want to welcome them to the University of Maine system with open arms and do everything that we can to make it easy for them to transition from the community colleges into the University of Maine system. And so the chancellor of the University of Maine system and the president of Maine Community College got together and worked out a process whereby uh, people transition from the community colleges into the University of Maine system with virtually no matriculation fees or no transfer fees or anything like that if they meet certain criteria. And what that has done is that has created a pathway for those people who never thought that they could go to college to start college, be successful in college, and say, boy, if I could do this in 2 years, imagine what I could do in four. I want to go to University of Maine, and at that point, then the whole financial aid system kicks in, and so forth and so on. Whether they've got to get a parent loan or whether they can get
Yep.
Pell Grants or whatever. Our education system from a higher education perspective in the state of Maine is one of the least expensive around. The University of Maine is just an absolute bargain in terms of how what it costs to put a student through there compared to most other colleges.
Yep.
And then to be able to transition them from the community college system, which in and of itself is a bargain. I think it's $4,800 a year or something like that for tuition, which is
Yeah.
little or nothing. Um, then to transition from that, get your basic core courses taken care of and out of the way, and then transition to the university system where courses are a little bit more money, but they may be have more substantive because you're now in the second in the third and fourth year of a particular educational pursuit. That makes sense. But looking back on the community college, maybe we need to tweak that somehow. But we need to have that discussion during the biennial budget. And it goes back to those priorities that I was talking about. Are we
Yep.
going to be the the healthcare provider of last resort for a third of Maine? Can we
Right.
continue to do that?
Right.
I mean, that's what Maine Care is. It's the healthcare provider of last resort, and a third of the people in Maine are participating in that.
Yeah. Which is
90,000 of which may or may not need to.
right. Yeah, which is just crazy. And I think it gets at the overall point of like, again, there's certain things that you could buy in your house that are nice and are beneficial, and you can see the value of, right. But if you don't have any money in your bank account, you don't buy it, right?
Right.
And I think that's the point that I was bringing up with that particular situation. But and especially when you consider, because I want you to talk a little bit about this, the type of things that she's now going to tax. I think I commented at the beginning, but like the party that is the party that cares about poor. Maybe this was before we got on, but the party that claims to be the one that cares about poor people and the elderly is imposing some taxes that are specifically most negatively going to impact poor people and the elderly and the sick, actually,
Mm-hmm.
in order to be able to continue in her reckless spending. And
Hmm.
so I'll let you talk a little bit about some of those things.
Sure. Sure. The biennial budget includes, as you probably well know, a tobacco tax of $1 a pack on cigarettes, beginning when the budget is passed. Um, that'll bring us up to about $3 a pack in tax on a pack of cigarettes. That will raise about $80 million annually coming into the state coffers.
Well,
Um,
the funny thing about that, I'll just comment really quickly, is like I don't think cigarettes are good for people. I think people should stop smoking cigarettes. Maybe they should use this as an excuse to like get themselves off of cigarettes or whatever. But the reality is that's for most people that's probably not going to happen. And this is like so it's you're adding this tax on. But then she also in her State of the State address on this one, she tried to claim that this will be good because it'll help get people off cigarettes. Well, it has nothing to do with why she's putting it through. It's just trying to make more money. She actually knows statistically that raising the cost, because we've done it before, is not going to cause people to stop buying cigarettes. They're addicted.
mhm,
And so just increasing the price is going to mean that they're going to spend less money somewhere else. But
correct.
anyway,
Hmm.
go. You can move
The
on. But I felt like that was
Sure.
worth.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, if you remember when we legalized marijuana in the state of Maine, one of the things is we'll make it legal, but we'll tax it. Well, the retail tax on marijuana is 10% right now. In her budget, she proposes to make that retail tax on marijuana 14%. Now, there's kind of a behind the scenes excise tax that producers pay and so forth that they're going to reduce that tax a little bit, increase the retail tax some. I don't know exactly what the net increase in revenue that's going to be. Haven't seen those numbers yet. Um, some balancing in the digital streaming world. There's a If you have cable TV, you'll see that you pay. I think it's a 6.5% tax on cable TV and some of those other types of things. What they and then if you're doing digital streaming, you pay no tax on that. So what the administration is saying is, well, what we want to do is we want to balance those out so that everybody in that space pays the same rate. So the cable tax will go down to 5.5%, and the digital streaming tax will go to 5.5% if this budget passes.
That's when I think of balancing and I say 6.5 and 0, it's not 5.5. Just for fun. it's not that's not where we get, but okay.
It's all about volume. It's all
Yeah.
about volume.
Well, and I don't necessarily have a huge problem. Like if we're going to tax television, right? To me, I don't necessarily care how we're receiving. I think the question is like the real issue that I have here is the behind the why, and it's this we're because we need to spend more money, right?
Hmm.
That's the problem that I have with this. But anyway, continue.
Okay, digital streaming. One of the big ones that is kind of for me, it's kind of egregious because we passed this pension tax um, exemption in the 130th, and then revisited in the 131st, and got it to where it is today. Um, in the 130th, we passed a bill that allows a person who's retired to exempt their private pension from taxes in the same way that your Social Security is exempted from state taxes. So we thought, well, it's not fair to let the Social Security folks not pay taxes on their stuff and then tax like, for example, the people that are getting a teacher's pension or a state
Mm,
employee's pension. Well, those are private pensions, and we were taxing those at the
mm,
state level. So we thought it was a good idea to basically ramp up a tax exemption to eventually get to the point where the state private pension tax exemption would mirror whatever the maximum Social Security tax exemption was. We passed the bill in the
Sounds
100.
reasonable.
Yeah, we passed the bill in the 130th. In the 131st, we increased the last band. Was supposed to have exempted the first 35,000, and we moved it from 35,000 up to the federal maximum Social Security level, which is $48,000 or 45,000. It's in that 48,000 range. So we passed that in the supplemental at the end of the 131st.
And when was the 131st? We non-legislatures
Okay,
don't speak in such
yeah,
terms.
okay. The 131st was 23-24.
Okay, yeah,
Okay, 23-24. The 132nd is 25,
yeah.
26.
So
But anyway,
we literally just passed this, is what you're saying.
right. Well,
Yeah.
in 24 we passed it.
Yeah.
In the first session of the 130th, which would have been 2023, we
Yeah.
passed the increase, and then in the supplemental budget at the end of the session in April of 24, the chairman of the Appropriation Committee tried to remove that bill and drop it back to 35,000, and she failed.
Okay.
So now the governor has put in a bill to say, okay, well, now we're going to means test this. So if you're a single person making more than $100,000 and part of your income is a private pension, then you're going to pay for every dollar you're over 100,000, you're going to pay tax on a dollar of your private pension. Okay. So
Okay.
if your adjusted gross income is $120,000 as a retired person, and 20,000 of that is a private pension, you'll pay taxes on that. You'll pay state taxes on that.
Okay.
The exemption is eliminated for couples making over 200. And again, it's a dollar for dollar thing.
Well, and do they don't do that with Social Security though? To your point, right? Like if
No.
you with Social Security, it's like this is the amount you can earn in Social Security,
Mm-hmm.
irregardless or regardless, whichever one of
Regardless.
of of all of your other income.
Correct.
It's focused on how much you make in Social Security, and so the issue, especially when you're talking about like what's interesting is this affects a lot of like state workers, right? So people in
Mm-hmm.
the state of Maine who, for those of you who don't know, both of us have backgrounds in finance, but if you're on Maine's pension program, like a lot of your teachers and state workers, they don't pay into Social Security, and so they don't get that. So the exemption that people who pay into Social Security get, they're not getting when they get their income. They're not being treated the same, and and so this was a way to balance that out and make it more fair, because they're, instead of doing Social Security, they do Maine PERS, or Maine
Correct.
retirement system.
And
So
I should point out that thanks to the efforts of Senator Collins, those folks that are currently receiving Maine PERS or will receive their teacher's pension or whatever will now be able to draw their Social Security as well if they've paid in enough quarters to Social Security. Senator Collins got that bill passed in the federal legislature, and so that is now law. So that those folks can take advantage of both sides of the aisle now.
which is good, because again, as you commented, those people were already paying into Social Security, but because they hadn't. Is it because they hadn't paid in enough quarters? Is that how it was working, or
Well,
they weren't qualifying,
teachers and state
or because they had,
workers
yeah,
don't pay into Social Security.
right,
They don't
but at
typically.
some point they did
But at
working
some
another
point, they
job.
may have had a job that had, they may have worked in the private sector, or they worked for the state for 20 years, came out, worked in the private sector for 20 years.
Right.
And so then they'd have plenty of quarters in to draw Social Security. But Maine PERS says, no, you can't draw your full Social Security. You can only draw a part of it based on some formula and so forth. And and all of
Yeah.
that's going away. So
Which is
that'll
good.
be very helpful to those people. But
Yeah.
the other, some of the other taxes, one particularly egregious one is a 70-cent tax on prescriptions. Now they don't call it a tax on prescriptions; they call it an assessment on pharmacies. And I've yet to understand, because I've talked with a number of pharmacists about this, but the legislation, the biennial budget legislation clearly says that this is an assessment on the pharmacies, not on the retail purchaser of a prescription. So they're going to, if a pharmacy does 100,000 prescriptions in a year, well, they're going to pay 70-cent assessment for every one of those
So
prescriptions that they
seventy
wrote.
thousand, $70,000. Yeah.
Right. That's going to come into the state of Maine. Where is that 70,000 going to come from? Clearly,
Increase
they've got to.
prices.
Yeah.
Right. Well,
And
it's so funny because I have to highlight this, right? Because the Democrats are freaking out and they're all upset about this idea of doing tariffs, right? Because tariffs is a tax on the main on the American person for buying something that's coming in here from the other country, right?
Mhm.
This is this same people that are trying to argue, oh, this isn't an assessment on this isn't a tax on people buying prescriptions, and it's the same principle, it's the same idea, right?
Mhm.
Like,
It
so if
is.
you're upset about one, you have to be upset about the other. Like, it's inconsistent. Like, it obviously is going to come out of anytime you tax a business, that you're basically taxing their clients, because they're the ones that are actually going to have to pay for it. When costs go up, this is one of those things when the stock market, I shouldn't say the stock market, when COVID happened and all this money got printed, I knew that inflation was going to happen. And I knew that for a lot of these companies, now Apple has proven this to be true, they're going to make a lot more money because they're just going to increase their prices more than the increase in the costs, like at the very least as much as it costs for them to do stuff, but more. I mean, really, Apple's still trying to maintain those same margins. So if their costs
Mhm.
come up, their costs come up, then the amount that people are paying is going up even more, and so the consumer is the one that's hindered, right? That's hurt. That being said, I do. I do think that there is a good reason behind tariffs. It's a much more complicated story, because it's focused on protecting American jobs and trying to bring American jobs back here, which I can't imagine what the good argument outside of the government needing to justify its reckless spending in taxing the elderly, the unhealthy, for their prescription medications, while pretending that they're not actually taxing them.
Well, and the other piece of that is, bear in mind too, with that 70-cent tax on each prescription, um, the pharmacist can't add that to a lot of the prescriptions that they're writing, because those prescriptions are being paid for by who? By
Main
Main
care, or
Care or Medicaid,
yeah,
Medicare, those kinds
yeah,
of things, and they tell you what they're going to pay.
right.
So that's the interesting thing. So where is that money going to come out of? It's going to come
People,
out of the profitability of the pharmacy, and people that are not using insurance to pay insurance and or some government program to pay for their pharmaceuticals.
yeah,
So it's hitting that group of people. The other one that's kind of that it doesn't make sense to me. There's a 6% ambulance assessment on the net operating revenue on non-municipal ambulance services. Um, we are literally struggling in the state of Maine to provide appropriate ambulance services in the rural areas of Maine. And we're going to add a 6% tax on them. Uh, the the administration says, well, if we add this 6% tax, and we can show it to the federal government, and that will allow us to draw down a greater portion of some money from this program or that program. And I'm kind of struck by that, because it doesn't seem to make sense to me to take more money out of a failing enterprise to try and get more money from another enterprise to bolster that failing enterprise. It just doesn't make sense to me that, and anybody that thinks that, they're definitely going to get more money out of the federal government has
right
failed to
now.
realize that there's a new fiscal agent in Washington, and
Yeah, it
he's
sure is.
not necessarily amenable to sending a lot of money to other people. So I think that's really, you know when you take the prescription tax, you take the ambulance tax, you take the tobacco tax. To your point, we're just hammering people who can least afford it.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, all so that we can afford government spending programs on poor people.
well, yes.
It's like we're going to hurt the poor people so that we can help the poor people.
Well, I'll give you
Like,
I'll give you the gist of a conversation I had 2 weeks ago. Someone said to me, "Oh, you can't the main care expansion people. You want to keep them on the rolls." And I say, "Why do we want to keep them on the rolls?" Well, the federal government reimburses us 90 cents, $90 for every $10 we put into the program. And I said, "But you don't have the $10 to invest to get the $90. You just don't have it. You just don't have the money. So it doesn't make any sense to continue to do this. We've got to figure it out." And that's part of
right,
the problem with the main
right.
care expansion.
So,
The feds pay 90% of that, as opposed to in the non-expansion population, they pay 70%.
right. So
So it's
even if they're paying 90%, as you point, it still costs
Mhm.
us something and we don't have that money to spend. But also,
Right.
again, there's a new sheriff in town, and is that going to continue in the new administration, right? Is that
Yeah.
and yeah, anyway, so that's it. And not only that, but there's the other side of it where like encouraging people not to work or not to work good jobs or not to really focus on getting out of this situation is actually harmful to our economy. I mean, they talk about the fact that again, we need to bring in all these foreign workers because we don't have enough people to work the jobs that currently exist in Maine. It's like what we kind of do. We just are encouraging them not to work. And so this is something that's very harmful to our economy as well. So
Yeah.
anyway,
Well, and I think
well,
that the governor has mentioned that she doesn't understand why people aren't getting off these welfare rolls and going to work. She doesn't
like,
understand that.
well, because it's
Well,
impossible. So I had a conversation. I may have probably mentioned this at some point on, but there back when I was a manager of a bank up in rural Maine, I had an employee who was working for me who I knew she was a single mom. And
mhm,
so and she was a 30-hour employee, but I was like, I'll get her whatever additional hours I can because I know that she can use the money to be able to help her family. Right. And so I was getting her, 40 hours by helping her fill in when people were out or at other branches when people were out, whatever it was. And then she had to come to me at one point. She sat down in my office and she said, "I can only work 30 hours. I can't work anymore because if I do, I will lose my son's main care, and it will cost me like $400 a week or something crazy like that." But it was a
mhm,
lot of money, especially for somebody who is making what she was making as a teller. And the problem with these systems, I understand why Republicans would oppose something like this, but the problem with these systems is there is no easy off ramp,
no, you're
right?
right.
Like it's a cliff. Now the Republicans, they don't want to create an off ramp because that will just like at least the theory is, and I think there's a way to do it, but the theory is that will just increase government spending on these programs because again I think there's a strategy that we could think about that might be able to do something to help push people off and not just have them go off this complete cliff. um but and I think the Democrats maybe wouldn't want something like that because it would actually be pushing people off of the system, and they seem to want more people on the system.
Mhm.
Um, And so it's a real challenge, is like, how do we encourage? And I think some of it is, again, eliminating people who shouldn't be on it and encouraging them to go back to work, or get to work, and evaluating
Hmm.
whether or not they really should be on this program. Like, somebody just I think the idea that just because you make a certain amount of money qualifies you for a program maybe is something we should revisit. If you make a certain amount of money because you're making poor life choices and you're not doing the things that you need to do to build a career, I don't want to pay for that. Like, I wouldn't pay for it for my family. Like, if you're
Yeah.
making bad decisions and it's hindering your life, I'm not going to support you. Like, you need to make good decisions. And are there some people in need, and should we as a society, in some form or fashion, charity or other, help people who are in need? Absolutely. Like, I have a heart, I have compassion, but like, this idea that we're supporting a bunch of people who are doing what they're doing simply because it's easier, not because it's even in their
Hmm.
best interest in the long run, is not something that I
Correct.
think we support. So anyway, but I want to be mindful of your time. I know you got a big game to get off to
Hmm.
in a bit, and also the people watching. But you had another conversation of one of the other taxes that I thought was interesting. Maybe we can talk about that, and then maybe wrap
Sure.
up in a little bit. But the paint one, the increase in
Sure.
the tax on paint, I thought that was interesting.
It is interesting. Um, for those that aren't aware, in 1972, lead paint, the use of lead paint was outlawed in the state of Maine as well as the rest of the country. So, for all intents and purposes, for 52 years, we have not applied lead paint in any place in the state of Maine. However, we are taxing paint companies 25 cents per gallon of paint uh, to put money into what's called the lead paint poisoning fund. What this fund does is this fund helps out people who have lead paint issues and so forth and so on. Uh, and and so uh, what the governor proposes to do is to raise that by 50 cents, from 25 cents to 75 cents per can, and continue to put that money into that lead paint poisoning fund. I have looked at the fund. It doesn't have a whole lot of money in it, but from what I understand, it's used to run programs to teach people about lead paint and the dangers of it, and to work with folks who may have lead paint issues, lead paint mitigation, and that kind of stuff. Um, but again, we haven't used lead paint in houses since 1972. Uh, but yet we're going to increase this tax on paint manufacturers from 25 cents to 75 cents, which that will ultimately end up hitting the consumer. So if you have bought a can of paint lately and experienced a bit of sticker shock on that, well, that's going to go up a little bit if this budget passes.
Yeah, and it's not really like a lot of money, right? When you think about it. Now, the increase, a 200% increase, is big, and what it's going toward is something that, as you were kind of saying, like, we don't really need more money for this type of program, because this is a problem that's disappearing over time. It's mostly gone. In fact, as a landlord, like, every single lease I sign, I have to include a disclosure about lead. So if people need to know about
Mm-hmm.
lead, it's being sent out as one of the requirements. So there's
Right.
really not a lot of need for education
Mm-hmm.
around this. And it seems more like a tactic to create a bucket of money that they can then pull from to spend on something else later, because that's kind of how they operate. And the other piece that I think is, we talk about the cost of owning a home, or being able to build a home, being too high. Like, why don't we not increase? I don't care if it's only 50 cents per can of paint.
Mm-hmm.
Let's not increase that at all. Like, what can we do to make it easier for people to, and cheaper for people to build houses? That's going to positively impact the cost of living. And again, that's what I wanted to highlight with all these things. Most of these things, like, the party that's complaining as Biden rose the cost of living. Well, not Biden by himself, but the cost of living rose under Biden, largely due to some of his policies, and here in the state of Maine, due to some Democrat policies as well, and they're complaining about Trump not doing enough to lower the cost of living, all while they are doing things that are just increasing the cost of living, making it more difficult to do business here in the state of Maine. And it's like the gaslighting that they continue to do is just, it's so ridiculous. Anyway, but yeah, I just want to thank you again, Jack, for doing what you're doing. Being in the legislature, especially in the minority, even though it's close, it's close. If some people don't show up, we can win some votes, right?
Yep, that's
And
right.
hopefully the special election this next week goes well. So if you live up in I think it's the Bangor area, Bangor Brewer and Old Town, I think, and
Hmm.
there's a special election for a House seat for Carolyn Fish. Definitely get out and vote for her so we can make up
Absolutely.
a little bit of the ground in the legislature. But it's close, but it's still being in the minority and having to fight with, or try to work together with the Democrats, especially in the appropriations committee. It's got to be challenging, and so I appreciate you doing the difficult work of fighting for the people of Maine, regardless of whether or not they're in they live in your district. Yeah, so thanks again
Hmm.
for coming on. If you have any last thing that you want to share with the people, now's the time.
Um, well, thank you for having me on. I'm, happy to come on and talk about the budget. It's easy to get into the weeds because, as you said initially, I think you were talking about this at the very outset, that the state budget is just so complicated that I think I looked at the language pieces and altogether there's about 645 pages that we're kind of digesting. We're in the public hearing phase of this now. So once we get through the public hearing phase, the committees, the policy committees will look at it. They'll weigh in on the administration's requests and then come back to the appropriations committee. And then we'll have to go through and figure out what we're going to fund, what we're not going to fund. And so that's really where we are in that process.
Yep.
We're trying to come to an agreement on supplemental, while at the same time listening to the pleas of the particular constituencies that are looking for money from the state government, including the various departments. So that's where we're
So,
at with the budget, and I appreciate being able to come on and talk with you. And feel free to give me a call anytime.
all right, and the other thing, so obviously you're hearing public comment. So if people, I think you can go to maine.gov and find your way there if you're really crafty. But there's a way for people to submit testimony online to show up in person. Is that right, or is this one
That
just
is
online? Yep.
Nope, that is correct.
Yep.
If you go to legislature.maine.gov, um, that brings you to kind of a inside baseball site, and then you can go to the committees. And if you go to the committees, there's directions in there that explain to you exactly how to submit testimony. You can submit testimony online. You can come to Augusta. You can testify by Zoom. You can be in person. There's any number of ways. If there are particular issues that you want to weigh in on, feel free. And if you can't find it, reach out to me. I'm pretty available. You can always reach out to me online. You can my phone number is typically out there on my business cards and so forth. So reach out to Chuck. He can get a hold of me,
Yep.
and we can help you with how to get to where you need to go. If there's a particular bill that you want to weigh in on or just to weigh in on the budget. Those are
Yep.
all, we look at all of those testimonies that come in. So that's where
Awesome.
we're at right now.
So let's get some more conservatives commenting on there, because I'm sure the liberals are. All right. Well, thank you again, Jack, and thank you all for for listening. The next podcast that we're going to be doing is next Monday. We're going to have Amber Levine, I believe, Amber Levine, who, if you paid attention to the news over the course of the past, I guess probably 3 or 4 years, you might have heard her name, and she's the mom who found out that her this guidance counselor in her school gave her daughter chest binders without her permission. And so we're going to be hearing her story, and not just it's going to get into doctors and a lot of other things, as well as like how many people are experiencing similar types of things that she's now able to help. So we're going to hear a lot about that. So tune in on Monday because we will be that will be a very fun conversation. Well, not fun conversation, but a good conversation. One of the things that we try to do here, obviously, is help the people of Maine know what's going on. And this is where you get to do your part. So if you're watching and you're paying attention and you feel like there's good information here, then your role is to share that information. Like, share, subscribe. I'm on all the different places. We're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, and shorts of these things are going to be there. So get on there, share those things so that the people of Maine can know what's actually going on here in our state. And I Love My Freedom has commented a couple of times, and I should have acknowledged earlier. Thank you. He said good morning from Auburn, and then he thanked you, Jack, for what you were able to share. So thank you. So again, we'll see you all next time, and thanks for tuning in. And Jack, hang on a little bit once we go off the air.
Mm-hmm.
All right. You guys have a great day.